presenting their analysis of the Telegram key exchange. Okay.
Okay. Oops. All right. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, I'm Linka, and this is a joint work with Martin Albrecht, Kenny Patterson, Eyal Ronen, and Igor Stepanos. So I want to talk to you about Telegram, which, as you probably know, is a widely used messaging app. But you might be thinking, okay, why do you want to analyze Telegram in particular? And because this is the real-world crypto session, I'm going to give you a real news headline, which calls Telegram the world's most important app, for now. So I think that says it all. But more seriously, Telegram is also interesting because it uses custom, highly non-standard protocols. And this entire suite is normally referred to as MT-Proto 2.0. One thing that needs to be said is that Telegram does technically support end-to-end encryption. However, this is very limited and it is largely unused in practice. And so in our work and also in this talk, I will only be focusing on client-server connections, which are also secured using this custom cryptography. Now, in previous work, we have already analyzed and written proofs for the channel part of this protocol, and also found an attack on the key exchange. In response to this, Telegram changed the protocol, and so the aim of this work was to analyze and provide proofs of security for this fixed key exchange protocol. So in this talk, I will give an introduction of Telegram. I will describe our security model and the Telegram protocols in more detail, and then I will show you what we were actually able to prove about these protocols. So, when you first install Telegram and go through the registration process, the client will initiate a connection in the background, which will run a key exchange protocol that is meant to establish a long-term key. And this is always referred to as the auth key. In fact, it will not do just one, but 2 runs of key exchange. And this will be almost the same protocol, but this time it will establish another key, which will be referred to as the temporary key. And finally, it will instantiate the channel using this temporary key. And in this channel, it will transmit a special message that is meant to bind the temporary key to the long-term key. And it will continue using this channel to transmit other information, such as the phone number authentication and so on. Now, after registration, during normal use of Telegram, the flow is very similar. So this is something that happens roughly every 24 hours. The client and the server will renegotiate this temporary key. And again, they will go through the binding step and then use the newly instantiated channel to transmit chat messages and so on. Now, in terms of scope of analysis, together with previous work, this means that we covered all of the main parts of the client-server protocol. Now, let me describe the security model. So we define a new game-based authenticated key exchange model that is tailored to Telegram. However, we are building upon previous work, and in particular, we use the multi-stage key exchange models, which are quite a nice fit for Telegram because they derive multiple keys over several stages. And so when we view the Telegram protocols from this multi-stage perspective, this long-term key establishment will actually be a 2-stage protocol, and then the temporary key exchange together with the binding message will be viewed as a 3-stage protocol. Now, to give you more detail about the model, we are in the standard setup. We are assuming a multi-user setting. We assume a standard key exchange adversary who is in control of the network, and it has access to corrupt, reveal, and test oracles. And we are only aiming to prove basic security properties. So what this means, we are proving indistinguishability of session keys for all stages, with forward secrecy kicking in from a particular stage. We also want to show client and server authentication, however, without full key confirmation, simply because Telegram does not achieve it. There are a few places where we had to weaken our model because of certain quirks of the Telegram protocol. And so the first of them is key dependence. So this means that in this multi-stage setting, some of the session keys of a particular stage might influence session key of the next stage. We also have non-uniform session key distribution. And now you might be panicking a bit, because isn't the whole point of key exchange to show key indistinguishability? Well, yes. However, you will see later that Telegram does not meet this generic goal, and we had to go a bit weaker. Finally, we also introduce a notion of a testable and a non-testable stage, because in some stages there's actually no extra session key being derived, and it is only for authentication. Now, I will show you the Telegram protocols. So the stage 1 is conceptually quite simple. So there's some grayed out material here that you don't have to pay attention to because it's cryptographically not relevant. This is just for rate limiting. And the whole purpose of the stage is just for the client to generate a fresh 256-bit secret encrypted using public key encryption under the server's long-term public key and send it to the server. And so this random value becomes the stage 1 session key. And you might be wondering, what kind of public key encryption do they use here? Well, this was actually the source of the attack in our previous work, and so this is the part that Telegram changed. And we had recommended them to use something standard. Well, this is what we got. So Telegram decided to implement OAP+, however, they also decided to make a few changes. And so I have highlighted them here. I don't have time to go in detail over everything, but you might notice that there is a use of SHA-256 to instantiate both of the random oracles. And the last one is actually replaced with a symmetric encryption call to AES-256 used in IgE mode. And if you're wondering what IgE mode is, this is what it looks like. It's basically like CBC mode. However, you also add the chaining of the plain text values into the cipher. And so what does this give you? Well, it gives you what CBC mode gives you, and so it was thought that this mode also gives you integrity. However, it actually doesn't. But Telegram really likes to use it, so it will appear again. Now, to show the second stage of the protocol, at a high level, this is just basic Diffie-Hellman key exchange. However, there's a few things you might notice here which may look a bit strange. And so the kind of big red flag here is what is actually the stage 2 session key. And so unfortunately, what Telegram does is take the shared Diffie-Hellman secret and take the first half of the bits, and then they are done. And so this is exactly the reason why we could not consider key indistinguishability from random strings, because this is trivially distinguishable. But this is the best that Telegram can do. There's a few other things. So the shares for Diffie-Hellman are actually transmitted in encrypted form using a symmetric encryption scheme. Unfortunately, they have IV reuse when they use this symmetric encryption scheme. And finally, there is this part of the protocol which is actually repeatable, which means that this protocol can have potentially infinite loops. And the reason for this is that the server uses a value derived from the shared secret to identify the client connection. However, this value is very short, and it is derived using SHA-1, so collisions are possible. And if there is a collision, it essentially requests the client to try again with a new value. Finally, there's a couple of primitives that appear here. So there's a KDA function, there's this symmetric encryption scheme, and a hash is being calculated at the end. So what primitives do they use? Well, of course, they are all custom-made. And so first, you see the custom key derivation function, whose perhaps most interesting property is that it outputs the first 32 bits of the key used to key the KDF as part of its output. This looks terrible, but actually the way it's used in Telegram, this is not even a problem. Now, we also have a custom hashed and encrypt symmetric encryption scheme, which is instantiated using SHA-1 and A:56 in IgE mode. And finally, we also have a custom stateful hash, which looks a bit like a key confirmation hash. However, all of the inputs into this function are quite short, so it doesn't really fulfill this purpose. And of course, all of these functions use SHA-1. So now, to show you the final stage for the temporary key exchange, in this binding step, as I said before, this is all happens using the channel instantiated with the temporary key. And the only thing that the client does is send a message and the encryption of the message under the long-term key. And so this is kind of trying to prove that the client knows the long-term key. And so how is this encrypted? I don't have time to go into detail, but this is actually using the channel encryption protocol of Telegram from the previous version. So this was MT-Proto 1.0. All right, so what were we actually able to prove about this? Now, this is a high-level summary of the result for the two-stage protocol. And to help you parse what this actually means, I have color-coded the terms. And so let's start with green, because green is good. We have a couple standard notions, such as the DDH and SExp, which can be reduced to the discrete logarithm with short exponents problem. And we also have quite a weak property, one-time PRF. We require this of SHA-1, which is the block cipher underlying SHA-1. So this may be not standard in the sense that it appears a lot. However, it's quite a weak thing to assume. We also have two higher level properties, which I will show in a bit more detail. So we require the Telegram's version of OAP Plus to be in CCA, and their hashed and encrypt scheme together with this custom KDF to provide plain text integrity. And finally, we also introduce one new non-standard assumption, which I will summarize a bit later. So now, to cover the two high-level properties, so we do have a proof that Telegram's version of IAB Plus satisfies in CCA, and it's actually quite a nice result because we can reduce it to the 1-1s of RSA. However, this did not come for free, so if you're interested, the proof is 30 game hops plus, and you should ask questions to my colleague Igor's, who actually wrote this proof. It's quite a work of art. All right, and the next part is the plain text integrity for Telegram's hashed and encrypt scheme. And so here the picture is maybe not so nice, but we do have one standard property. So this refers to the even Mansour cipher construction, which actually appears as when we consider this hash and encrypt scheme used in conjunction with the particular KDF, so we always study them kind of together. And we also have two new non-standard properties about SHA-1 and SHA-1. Now, what can we say about the three-stage protocol? Because the three-stage protocol essentially copies the first two stages of this long-term protocol, we can kind of copy the terms from our previous reduction, and there's only one other thing that we need. So this might be a bit strange, but the property that we actually rely on is unforgeability of this MT-Proto 1.0 channel encryption protocol. And the reason for this is that, well, this is actually the only thing that the protocol requires of this scheme. And at the same time, this is kind of almost the best it can achieve because it is not known to be a good protocol and has several weaknesses which were also reported already in previous work. And this proof also relies on two more novel assumptions about SHA-1 and SHA-1. To outline what these new assumptions actually refer to, at least shortly, so we have two PRF-like assumptions that essentially refer to the pseudorandomness of SHA-1 on fixed inputs. so this is a bit of a constraint on the adversary, but there is partial key leakage. However, because SHA-CAL1 has 512-bit keys, we believe that this assumption is still reasonable to make. We have two other assumptions which refer to second pre-image resistance of SHA-1, which is still believed to be hard. However, it is not quite it, and so we had to introduce certain small tweaks. And finally, we have a property that we call the indistinguishability of key reuse with SHA-1-based functions. This sounds a bit dangerous, but the adversary is actually quite constrained here because it can only submit very short inputs. And so we believe it's still hard to achieve anything in this setting. Now, what can we take from all of this? One kind of obvious thing is that MTProto 2.0 as such is quite a brittle protocol. So even though we have proven security, it comes with certain caveats. And just to point out a few things, so SHA-1 is really misused for many purposes in this protocol where better solutions exist. There is quite a heavy reliance on plaintext checks, which do prevent attacks. However, they place more burden on implementers to actually continue getting these checks right. And finally, some protocol features, such as, for example, these retry loops, only really create complexity in the protocol, and they do not actually contribute to its security. And so in general, we can very much say that ad hoc design leads to subpar security guarantees. On a perhaps more positive note, we can also highlight that implementation details, such as encoding schemes, can actually be modeled faithfully in proofs. And so this is something we had to do for Telegram, but maybe the message is that you can do it in general. And finally, and maybe unfortunately, Telegram is not as broken as you thought. Perhaps unless you can break our assumptions. All right, thank you for listening. Happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thanks, Lenka, for the great talk and for telling us more about Telegram that maybe some of you were mentally prepared to learn. We have time for a couple of questions.
Yeah, so just to give some fun to maybe cryptanalysts, I just wanted to understand for your proof, in which sense, is there some room between assumptions and proof, or is it clear that if you break any of this property, the Telegram is also broken? Or is it
yeah, so unfortunately there is some room, so there is a possibility that if you break our assumptions, you don't break Telegram, you only break our proof. However, we have different versions that would lead to a break of Telegram.
Thank you. We have time for another question. I was wondering, Lenka, is there anything to take away in terms of like designing protocols? I mean, we know kind of Signal, we refer to that as the golden standard. Is there something we could still learn from it beyond, of course, not doing a bunch of things that you were already talking about?
That's quite a hard question. Yeah, I think in this crowd, probably all of the lessons learned are things that you already know. So it's more like, how do we transfer these lessons to people outside of the cryptographic community? So yeah,
Definitely also a lesson. Okay, let's thank Lenka again. Now we'll come to the next talk. Wait for the slides to be up. All right, so our next talk will be on the multi-device group messaging in WhatsApp, and then Jones will give it.
Cool. Thanks. Hey, so what's up? They have about over 2 billion users, and a huge part of their marketing strategy seems to lean heavily into the privacy they provide those users through end-to-end encryption. I think a lot of us will be aware that WhatsApp is sort of based on Signal, and Signal's had a lot of analysis over the years. This is just a few papers, but they keep on coming. Loads and loads of papers, and loads of interesting stuff coming. But most of it's focused on the two-party case. The multi-party case is a lot more sparse with regard to analysis. WhatsApp and Signal both use this thing called sender keys, which has had some informal analysis in this more is less paper from Euro S&P 2018. And it's also more recently had this nice analysis titled "WhatsApp with Sender Keys," which focuses on the composition of the sender keys and the underlying two-party channels that they're based upon. And it's a really neat piece of work, but it's very focused on this one part. And the thing is that WhatsApp's a really big system. Despite their white paper only being 29 pages long, there's a lot of complex components that move around together, and we don't really know how they work together perfectly very well. Our understanding is pretty loose. They have a closed source implementation, and so this means we don't really know too much about how everything works. And that's what we wanted to find out in this work. So how does WhatsApp actually implement multi-device group messaging? And given that we know this information, what security guarantees do they provide to those 2 billion users? So in this work, we provide a comprehensive description of multi-device group messaging in WhatsApp, which we back by reverse engineering their client implementation. Mostly the web client, but also bits and bobs come from the Android client as well. In doing so, we propose a variant of the device-oriented group messaging model, which is a model we designed whilst analyzing Matrix, and we extend it to support device revocation. So we analyze WhatsApp within this model and state and prove its security guarantees, which we should let you know about in a bit. Oh, cool. So how does group messaging work in general in WhatsApp? Well, they use a thing called sender keys. And so here we have 4 devices, Alice, Bob, and Claire. And Alice has 2 devices. And in general, you have a sender key session that contains some sort of message counter, some symmetric state that becomes a chain key. It's going to get ratcheted to provide forward secrecy, and a signing key pair. And then these are going to be distributed over existing two-party channels. So this would usually be a signal two-party channel. So think X3DH plus a double ratchet. And these get distributed for every other member of the group and then saved in their session store. And this one we just saw here is Alice's sending session, but every other device in the group is going to generate their own and distribute them. And then we're going to fill up our session store with a sending session for every participant. When we want to send a message, we're just going to increment our message counter. We're going to do some nice little symmetric ratcheting operation, and then we're going to do an encrypt and sign and distribute that ciphertext to everyone else. But because we're in the group messaging setting, groups can change, and so we need to figure out how to handle these membership changes. Adding a device is pretty easy. Because we have a symmetric ratchet, all we need to do is share the current value of our sending session with the rest of with the new member. When we want to remove a device, so here Alice might remove her second device after a revocation, Alice is going to need to, or every remaining member in the group is going to have to generate a new session and distribute it to the remaining members of the group. So this is a bit more laborious, but it works. And it means that removed members can't access these new messages, which is nice. So intuitively, we'd expect that the security guarantees we get from sender keys rely primarily on the two-party channels that they're distributed over. So if the two-party channel is currently secure, we'd expect that the sender key sessions arrived securely, and so the messages should be secure as well, assuming these, the encryption scheme works, the ratcheting works, and the signature scheme works. And we should also probably expect that state compromise, recovery from state compromise should work too, because we're using these signal channels. And once the signal channel has healed after, say, Bob has had their device compromised, well, then the sender key session sent over it should also should be secure as well. And most implementations, so WhatsApp, will regularly rotate their sender key sessions to lean into this PCS of the underlying two-party channels. We also require this forward secrecy from the underlying channels if we want to get forward secrecy in the sender key sessions, because we want to protect the original distribution message, which has an old value of the symmetric ratchet. So this is how it all works in theory. But in practice, this is a lie. And this was first shown to me by this clone detection paper from a while back. And what they showed is that actually in practice, the way many of these signal derivatives work is they keep a bank of two-party sessions. So here, Bob's device keeps up to 40 of these sessions that are active with Alice's device. And so what this means is that you kind of lose all your PCS guarantees. In the best case, so this is just if one of your pairwise session states has been compromised and none of the long-term key pairs involved, you still need this compromised pairwise session to be ejected from this local cache of 40 active pairwise sessions. And then because we're in sender keys world, any of those compromised pairwise sessions could have been used to distribute a sender key session. And so that each of those sender key sessions also needs to be ejected from a cache of 5. And so even in the best case, you can effectively, an adversary playing the right games with the network can maintain compromise indefinitely. And so most of this was shown in those nice 2 papers I showed earlier. But this has some real knock-on effects for the PCS guarantees of the sender keys channels, and so in the group messaging context as well. We shouldn't be too harsh on WhatsApp, though, because it seems like this is something that most messaging applications do. I'm not aware of any messaging application deployed in practice that achieves the kind of PCS guarantees that our modeling usually requires in practice. But WhatsApp does provide quite a compelling alternative. So what's the point of PCS? The point of PCS is that at some point we want to recover security after a compromise. And so they have this compelling alternative in the form of device revocation. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about device management in WhatsApp. So it's quite a hierarchical system where there's one primary device that manages a collection of companion devices. When we want to link a new companion device, the way to work is they'll exchange key pairs out of band through a QR code in the normal case. And then the primary device is going to assign 2 data structures. The first is called the linking metadata, and it contains the identifying information of the primary key and the companion's key as well. And this is timestamped and signed. And then the second data structure is a list. So the primary device is going to regularly update everyone with, this is the list of my current companion devices. At the end of the linking process, the companion device will also sign to attest that I'm happy to be one of Alice's devices. And this is important to stop unknown key share type attacks where you can adopt someone else's device. The revocation process is a lot simpler. So all you need is for the primary device, because it's hierarchical, all you need is for the primary device to remove the companion device from this list and sign a new list with the updated timestamp. The difficulty comes when you need to convince the server to distribute the new device list. Because in our model, the server might be malicious. And so if you're revoking a device because you've compromised their state, you've lost it or it's been compromised in some sense, then the server might not want to tell your communicating partners about this. WhatsApp has a few ways of doing this. One of the ways they do this is they have automatic expiry of device lists. And so they sort of force the server's hand in this way. But they have another method, which we're going to talk about now, because I think it's pretty neat. So it's kind of like a gossiping protocol, so that WhatsApp clients will definitely have an up-to-date view of each participant's device composition, providing that you have received one fresh message over a pairwise channel from the user's primary device, so since an event has occurred. So an example of this might be here. We've got Alice, Bob, and Alice's second device in a group, and at the moment they all agree on the group membership. But at some point, Alice might revoke her device. And now we're going to have a little bit of a desynchronization here, because straight away, Alice's device doesn't believe A2 is in the group, but Bob's device probably still does. It doesn't know about the revocation. And so Alice is going to try and inform Bob about this as best she can. And to do this, Alice's device is going to mark all of her sender key sessions as old sessions that need rotating because A2 has access to them. The next time A1 needs to send a message to one of these groups, A1 is going to send out a new sender key session, and they're going to send it over a pairwise channel, and when they do, they're going to include a little update message that tells Bob about it. And the server now has two options. They can let this message through, or they can disallow messages from A1 going to the group. But because these are two different devices run by the user, like that second option, just blocking A1 from participating, effectively ends up being a full denial of service, which is pretty detectable by the user. Like they're not allowed to participate in groups. Alternatively, they can let these messages through, and then Bob will learn about the revocation. And so this is like quite a nice way of forcing the server's hand. It's not perfect, but it works pretty well. I'm going to skip these, sorry. Woo. Cool. Sorry. There, OK. I'm going to skip a bit about history sharing and talk about group membership. So the thing about WhatsApp is that the server has full control of group membership. So this is a problem that was pointed out in that More is Less paper in 2018, but it's still the case. And this means that if you're a user and you want to make sure that your messages are secure, you've got to constantly check on the UI of your phone, who's in my group? Has the server added someone who shouldn't be in the group? And this is super annoying and unnecessarily burdensome. We have ways to solve this problem. In fact, the device management machinery we just saw is a way of managing a group of users. And so the machinery almost exists in WhatsApp already. But there are also some weaknesses in their messaging protocol. In particular, there's a lack of participant consistency. And so this means that WhatsApp doesn't provide any guarantee that devices have a consistent view of who's in the group. So say again here we have Alice and Bob in a group, and the user level membership that maybe A1 sees could be just Alice and Bob. But the server could be presenting a different view to A2, say Alice's laptop, and there might be actually Claire from Alice's laptop's perspective. And this means that if Alice isn't checking the membership regularly on every single one of her devices, then there could be chances to add adversarial users. And this is it's just unnecessary, effectively. It could be fixed with participant consistency, and this is a thing we have in group key exchange protocols. So just a quick summary of our results. We did find in our security analysis and our proofs that WhatsApp provides confidentiality and authentication in the straightforward cases. We found some fun little subtleties to do with history sharing, but these all are with respect to existing compromise. So effectively, if your two-party channels are compromised, then I can send you message history and rewrite your history, for example. But you need to compromise the channels first. So it's more of a subtlety. That's interesting. But we also saw that they have super limited post-compromise security against even the most occasionally active adversaries. And this is not perfect, but it also seems to be par for the course. And so we found that they provide a much more compelling alternative, potentially to PCS, which allows a user to actively decide that a device they are using has been compromised. Maybe they've lost it. Maybe they found malware on the device. Lots of examples where a user knows, and we can exploit this active active knowledge of compromise from the user to get something that's we can recover security much more quickly and much more reliably. So this is a really nice feature. But on the other hand, the lack of user control over group membership and participant consistency in the protocol failed to fulfill what I would say are like the expectations for a group messaging protocol. What we have here is something that's a lot looser than like group key exchange or group messaging. So just to sell our work a little bit, all the little like fun little tidbits and details in this talk are captured in our model and in our security analysis. So if you want to see how that worked, look at section 7 of our paper. I think it's quite nice. And if you're ever going to be analyzing device management, look at our public key orbits formalism. It might be useful for you, it might not. And it's much smaller than some of our other formalisms, so it might be easier to use. And then our description, everything in this talk was captured in our description, which was partially thanks to the WhatsApp white paper, but a lot of it came from our reverse engineering effort. So if you'd like a more complete description of how group messaging in WhatsApp actually works, take a look at section 3 of our paper. And that's pretty much it. Please ask me questions or anything like that.
Thanks, Dan. We do have time for a couple of questions, and I should be running away with that.
Hi, thanks for the interesting talk. So my first question is about device management. I was wondering, is there any device revocation for the main device? So can you revoke it from a secondary device?
So that's a really good point. I should have actually mentioned that. If you lose your primary device or anything like goes wrong with your primary device, you effectively have to reset your whole cryptographic identity. So that's like one of the negatives of this hierarchical system. And so maybe having like an alternative like construction of that would be useful.
Does that also apply for this session expiration? So basically, if your main device goes offline for some extended period of time, do you lose access to your session? Because, as you said, the device management list has an expiration time, right, to force the server to honestly.
Oh, yeah, lovely question. So devices expire once every like 35 days. And as soon as one expires, clients will reject all of your companion devices, but your primary device will stay alive forever. It doesn't require refreshing.
Thank you.
Oh, cool.
Thanks for the talk. Regarding the reverse engineering effort, I'm just wondering, how would you quantify that in terms of it being time-intensive or effort-intensive? I'm supposing you focused more on the Android application because that probably is easier to reverse engineer. Could you speak more to that in terms of how it went? Did you face any roadblocks there or any difficulties?
So I think they didn't, like, WhatsApp doesn't seem to try very hard to stop you from doing this, if that makes sense. They're not, so that was quite useful. I think I'm most proficient with web technologies, which is why we went with the web clients. But web clients are a little bit limited because they can't be a primary device. For example, that's limited to usually mobile phones. So we had to like fill in those gaps by checking out the Android client. Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, thanks.
All right, if there are no further questions, then let's thank Dan again. And we can turn to the third talk, the session. Right, and we'll hear about the triple ratchet protocol by Daniel Joost. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. This is joint work with my wonderful co-authors Yevgeny, Shu, Thomas, and Rolfe. So, as you probably all know by now, the Signal protocol is sort of considered to be the gold standard in two-party secure messaging. It's supposed to provide you forward secrecy and post-compromise security. And as you might also know, its security is mainly based on the hardness of Diffie-Hellman types of assumption. A bit more concretely, we can actually split the Signal protocol into two parts. First, we have the X3D8 protocol, which establishes an initial key. And then we have the double ratchet protocol, which sort of moves this key forward to provide all those types of more advanced security guarantees. Now, recently, people also have to start caring about post-quantum security. So if you just look at the initial double ratchet protocol and X3DH, then both of them are not post-quantum secure. However, a couple of years ago, Signal rolled out actually post-quantum X3DH, which fixes the first part of it. So now Signal is secure against harvest now, decrypt later attacks. However, the actual double ratchet still is only secure against classical attackers. And in this talk, I will focus on the double ratchet and will show how we made that post-quantum secure. The double ratchet, in turn, is sort of split between the public ratchet, which is Diffie-Hellman. It provides the post-compromise security, and the symmetric ratchet, which provides forward secrecy, which is based on symmetric primitives. So the symmetric ratchet is post-quantum secure as far as we know, and in the rest of the talk I will be mostly focusing on the Diffie-Hellman public ratchet part. So this public ratchet that has been abstracted by Alvin, Coretti, and Dodis as a so-called continuous key agreement protocol, and it roughly works as follows. So we have Bob, who has a secret key, and Alice who has a public key, and whenever Alice sends a new message, she will sample a new secret key, send the public key to Bob, they will derive a new key, and so on and so forth. And if, let's say, Alice's initial secret key gets corrupted, then this corrupts a couple of messages, but eventually we will sample fresh randomness and security will restore. And quite luckily, Alvin, Coretti, and Dodis also generalized this Diffie-Hellman-based ratchet to a general ratchet protocol based on a generic CAM. The protocol looks slightly different. Now for each message we sample a fresh key pair and then do a key encapsulation, but overall the spirit stays quite similar. So that's great. In principle we know post-quantum secure key encapsulation, so are we done? And the question is, unfortunately not, because that's not practical. A post-quantum secure CAM is roughly 2 kilobytes, which is almost 2 orders of magnitude bigger than what Signal currently sends. So, and Signal wanted to limit the overhead to roughly 40 bytes. I mean, there's some wiggle room, but it shouldn't be 2 kilobytes per message. So in this work, we proceed in 3 steps. First, we make a tailor-made key encapsulation that's tailored to the setting of secure messaging. Second, we apply chunking to split these CAM messages even into smaller chunks. And finally, we do the hybridization to make sure that we not only post-quantum secure, but we also maintain all the classical security the double ratchet has as of today. So let's dive into the first part. If you pay close attention, then when I showed you the Diffie-Hellman ratchet, you might have noticed that each group element actually sort of serves 2 purposes. It's like used in one message, but then also as the randomness, but then also as the public key in the next message. And with Katana, we wanted to do the same type of optimization also for the post-quantum setting. To this end, we introduce a new primitive called ratcheted CAM, where, as usual, we have a public key and a secret key, but now if Alice wants to encapsulate to the public key, she will first sample a fresh key pair, and then also use this key pair as an additional input to the encapsulation mechanism. The fresh encapsulation key and the ciphertext is then sent to Bob, who will use both of them as inputs for the decapsulation mechanism. And the sort of nice part is that this new primitive leads to a very natural continuous key agreement protocol now by just reversing the role and doing another round and so on and so forth. Furthermore, if we overlay the Diffie-Hellman ratchet protocol on top of it, we can actually see that this sort of fits up nicely, and indeed the Diffie-Hellman double ratchet is just an instantiation of this ratcheted chem, which sort of by coincidence has an empty ciphertext. And the goal is now for us to bring this type of optimization to the post-quantum setting. Okay, that was one too fast, by also trying to reuse information between this fresh encapsulation key and the ciphertext so that they get smaller and we have less overhead. Before we do that, let's first briefly look at sort of the template for a very general post-quantum chem. Basically, they all consist of two components, and if you're not overly familiar with post-quantum chem, you can really think as the second component as some kind of noisy encryption of the key, and the first component as reconciliation information that lets you get rid of the noise. But more crucially, we can sort of observe that this first component and an encapsulation key essentially share the same structure, especially if we choose the matrix D to be square size or even symmetric. So our idea is then, okay, what if we just reuse sort of the fresh encapsulation key as reconciliation information for the ciphertext? And this is quite good because this first component is actually the much bigger one in post-quantum chem. And I should briefly mention that similar optimization ideas have been, there have been similar ideas in previous work, but unfortunately there were some minor flaws in their security proof, so those protocols are not necessarily secure. So if I overlay this with our ratcheted chem primitive, we see now that this sort of gives us a very natural protocol where this encryption key A now serves two purposes, as the actual encryption key and as the reconciliation information. And furthermore, we observe that this does not affect the correctness of the chem. But the big question is now, is this actually secure? To this end, let me briefly go back to the Diffie-Hellman instantiation. And here we observe that, let's say, this initial secret key of Bob B0 was compromised, then we can still argue the security of the second key, K2, by standard Diffie-Hellman. And importantly, this reduction works because the first key, K1, even though it depends on A1, which also is used for the second key, we don't need the private A1, it's enough to have the public G to the A1. However, if we now do the same in the with Katana, then we see that we have a problem, because now the noisy key exchange, the ciphertext, actually has a subtle dependency on the secret from our LWE instance. So trying to base the security of Katana based on learning with errors, we're stuck, we cannot do it. What do? Well, we use a slightly different assumption which has been proposed recently, which is called hint LWE. And in hint LWE, in addition to the information from LWE, parties also get a hint, which is essentially an arbitrarily linear combination of the secret and the noise, as long as there's some fresh noise included as well. And this hint, then we can just set to be this ciphertext, and now the proof goes through nicely. I should note, however, while one can reduce the security of hint LWE to regular LWE, one does pay in the parameter choice for that. So we actually did the math, and we now have to choose, for the same level of security, we have to choose our encryption key slightly bigger for Katana. However, because now we can avoid all this duplicate version in the ciphertext and reuse the encryption key in the ciphertext, our overall sizes are roughly half of the size. So great, we've essentially saved half of the bandwidth. However, that's still very far away from sort of the level of overhead that Signal would consider to be acceptable. So what can we do? Well, we cannot send a full ratcheted chem ciphertext every message. Naive approach is just send one every so often. And then, at least amortized, we roughly are down to the level of overhead we want. However, now if we look, I should also briefly talk about the symmetric ratchet. Let's say we're in a situation where only Alice sends, then she can still symmetrically ratchet forward, and we might think, okay, only send the ciphertext for the first message. However, if that message gets lost, now Bob cannot decrypt anymore. And immediate decryption is a really important property to Signal, so that does not work. And instead, Alice actually would need to include the ciphertext in every single message. So in the worst case, depending on the communication pattern, we don't actually save something. A second approach would be to just split this ciphertext into small parts and send one part every message. Now, if one of those is lost, we only need to resend that small amount of information. That's actually quite nice. The problem is now we would sort of, if we're in a situation where only Alice sends, we would need to know which of the chunks actually get lost. So we can do something slightly more smart, which is to use chunk using an erasure, or sometimes also called error correcting code. So now we use this stuff from coding theory, and we can take this long ciphertext, put it into chunks, and get a nice property that as long as Bob receives sufficiently many chunks, then it doesn't matter which he received, he will be able to reconstruct the ciphertext and can decrypt the new message. Great. So this, in summary, lets us split the ciphertext into small pieces, and we get to the ballpark of overhead Signal considers to be acceptable. So, are we done? It actually turns out almost, but not completely, because now we have a post-quantum secure double ratchet, but what if LWE turns out to be actually less secure than Diffie-Hellman? Who knows? So what we really want is a hybrid secure message scheme where as long as either the post-quantum or the classical assumption is secure, we're good. So again, there's several options. One of them might be to just say, okay, let's replace our Katana ratcheted chem with a hybrid secure ratcheted chem, then do the chunking, and then use Signal standard symmetric ratcheted on top of that. And that, in principle, works. However, because this chunking slows down post-compromise security, if you actually only care about a classical attack, now you have suddenly much slower post-compromise security than what Signal deploys today. So that's not great. So second attempt would be to run two ratcheted chems in parallel, and then there's one big question, and that's how do you maintain this sequence of root keys? Let's say here, small example, Alice does both the chems in parallel, sends sufficiently many chunks, but before Bob receives them, he sends a message. Now he can move forward the Diffie-Hellman one, mix in the new key, send this to Alice. Alice can also derive the key, and now suddenly Bob gets the remaining message, so he can again advance his symmetric key. However, what happens if now Alice sends a different message? Well, we're in a bit of a problem, because now Alice will derive a different third key. So that whole approach sort of works, but there always seems to be some kind of edge cases, and it seems to be really tricky to make that work reliably in all those edge cases. So instead, we take a slightly more conservative approach, and what we do is we just really run the two entire ratchet, including the symmetric ratchet, in parallel, and then only mix the two symmetric keys we get out of those ratchets at sort of the last second for each individual message we want to encrypt. And So here we would then just take the two symmetric keys, do a key derivation, and use this join key to do the encryption and attach both the Diffie-Hellman element and the chunk from the post-quantum ratchet separately. And it turns out if you do that, actually we now get a very nice protocol. It might have slightly more overhead than some of the more optimized variants in terms of like sending one additional counter, but in the grand of schemes this seems very reasonable, and we were able to prove this secure quite nicely. So, and the really nice property is this protocol is at least as secure as today's double ratchet if you only worry about classical attackers, and it's way more secure than current protocol if you're worried about quantum attackers. Okay, this essentially concludes my talk. So we've seen how we take signals double ratchet, then we added another layer which is a post-quantum ratchet, and together this gives us what we call the triple ratchet. And our post-quantum ratchet consists of this new primitive called a ratcheted chem and an efficient instantiation, therefore called Cantana. And then we use not overly deep, but quite neat techniques such as erasure codes and this whole hybridization to make all of this work. Okay, thank you.
Right, thanks Daniel. We have questions. We need to give people some time to think of another one. We have another time for another one, maybe.
Okay.
Oh.
Thanks for the great talk, Daniel. Presumably, to use these erasure codes, you need to add additional metadata into the messages, so you know where you are in the code or which segment you're trying to decode. Does that lead to any issues concerning privacy? That we can now be getting more metadata about which message is which in a sequence?
I think when it comes to the exact erasure code, maybe I refer you to Rolfair, but what we can use is so-called structured erasure code, where essentially the first n chunks are just really chops of the message, and you only need to do complicated stuff sort of once you need the redundancy. And yes, we do include some additional counters, which essentially count the chunk. But I think it's quite similar to the counters you anyway have within the symmetric ratchet. And if you care about the metadata privacy, then anyway you would use something like sealed sender to hide all this metadata as good as possible.
I guess I was just wondering, I mean, I'm aware that these ideas have made it, at least to some extent, into the revision of Signal. Do you see applications kind of like beyond secure messaging immediately of ratcheted chems, Katana, your design?
I hope there are more applications. I think the way we designed and formalized ratcheted chem, it's fairly tailored to our setting of a continuous key agreement, but who knows? I mean, I think the idea of reusing this kind of part seems quite natural, and it has come up a couple of times before. I think it was really this hint LWE assumption which was sort of the missing puzzle piece to make it actually secure.
Okay, thanks. Then if there are no further questions for Daniel, let's thank him again. And then we come to the fourth talk in the session. We check the time, we're pretty good on time, for which we'll need a bit of an AV setup, reshuffling. So I'll give AV a few moments to do that. As probably many of you seeing the full room, I was very excited to see the program for the conference and specifically this session. Looking forward to all the talks, including the last one, which will be given by Akshaya Kumar from Georgia Tech. Unfortunately, the geopolitical situation didn't allow Akshaya to travel here. So we'll have her remote, and peeking at the AV booth, you can already see her there. So I'm very much looking forward. We see her there. Welcome, Akshaya. Welcome to Eurocrypt. remotely. Let me check whether you can already hear us.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do hear you. Perfect. So
Thank
let's wait for the slides to also show up on Zoom. Thanks to the AV team for shifting this over in the middle of the session for us.
I'll try and share my screen. See it, please.
So far we see the desktop, not the slides.
Better now.
There we go. Perfect.
Thank you.
Awesome. So Akshaya will be talking about analyzing group chat encryption in MLS, Session, Signal, and Matrix. Akshaya, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Felix, and welcome to the last talk of the session. I'm sorry I wasn't there in person, but I'm really excited to share our analysis of group chat encryption algorithms in MLS, Session, Signal, and Matrix. This is joint work with my advisor, Joseph Yeager. For some years now, the cryptographic community has tried to provide the average user with end-to-end encrypted communication. End-to-end encrypted or secure messaging has seen massive success with deployment across a variety of platforms that encrypt content under keys accessible only to the endpoints of the communication. Not just that, we as a community are also building the messaging layer security standard to standardize end-to-end encrypted messaging. Collectively, these apps are used by billions of people, so it is vital to study the security of these apps. Our work focuses on group chat encryption in messaging apps. In the group setting, members of a group chat want to establish an encrypted communication channel between themselves with some help from a server. Broadly speaking, secure messaging in the group setting can be viewed as a composition of two building blocks. The first is key agreement. This building block establishes a shared symmetric key between members of a group. It can be done in many ways, depending on what guarantees we want. This is the novel part of group messaging and has received a lot of academic attention. We don't focus on this part. Instead, we look at chat encryption, which uses the keys derived during key agreement. What security properties would we want from chat encryption? At the very least, we want privacy and integrity against an attacker who does not know the key. We could achieve this by just using secure symmetric encryption, but then group members could impersonate each other because they all know the same symmetric key. This means that normal privacy and integrity from symmetric encryption doesn't suffice in group chats. We also want integrity against group members themselves. In other words, we want chat encryption to guarantee sender authenticity against group insiders on top of privacy and integrity against group outsiders. Naturally, we can achieve sender authenticity using digital signatures. This means that in addition to sharing a symmetric key, group members, in addition to sharing a symmetric key with all group members, each member has their own signing key pair. In previous work, we formalized chat encryption in groups as the symmetric sign encryption primitive, which aims to jointly capture the security of symmetric encryption and signatures. In particular, in last year's paper with Igor's, we introduced a formal model for symmetric sign encryption and defined the security notions and used these notions to analyze keybase. In this paper, we looked at several of their messaging apps, identified their core chat encryption algorithm, and made it fit our model. Then we used their security definitions to prove these algorithms secure or find attacks in our model. When we found attacks, we checked if an attack against our model translated into a real-world attack against the protocol. This required studying the details of the protocol beyond the core chat encryption algorithm. Finally, for each implementation, we proved which security guarantees they do actually achieve. Roughly, we prove security up to the attacks we find. When we defined security notions for symmetric sign encryption, it was natural to think about security against group outsiders and group insiders. An outsider is an attacker that uses the application and may compromise individual users' signing keys, but does not know the symmetric key of the group it is trying to attack. An insider is an attacker that is part of the group itself and knows the symmetric group key, but does not know the signing keys for anyone but themselves. It is in this latter threat model that we found most of our attacks in. We said that chat encryption needs to jointly capture the security of symmetric encryption and digital signatures. So the natural way to build chat encryption is by generically composing these two building blocks in the sign then encrypt or encrypt then sign fashion. A naive sign then encrypt would first sign the message using the sender's signing key, then encrypt the resulting signature along with the message using the symmetric group key. Then the sender will broadcast the resulting ciphertext to the group. Encrypt then sign is similar, but with the order of operations reversed. All constructions we analyzed implement chat encryption using variants of the sign then encrypt and encrypt then sign constructions. For this talk, I'll focus on the sign then encrypt constructions. Naive composition is dangerous because they lead to what we call context switching attacks. Consider two users that are both in two different groups, group 0 and group 1. Say user U sends a message M in group 0 by first signing with their signing key and then encrypting with group 0's symmetric key, and then broadcasting the ciphertext C to group 0. A malicious insider can decrypt the ciphertext sent to group 0, re-encrypt it with group 1's symmetric key, and send the new ciphertext to group 1, effectively impersonating U to group 1. The core issue here is that the same signature is being interpreted in two different encryption contexts. We found variants of this attack in MLS in session, though there it allows an insider to replay within the same group. Attacks are also possible where the encryption ciphertext is interpreted in two different signing contexts. To prevent context switching attacks, we need to bind the signing and encryption components. This can be achieved by additionally signing the group key identifier, which is a value that uniquely identifies the symmetric group key, and depending on the encryption scheme, also the nonce in the associated data. From the other direction, we also want to include as input to the symmetric encryption scheme the sender identifier, which is a value that uniquely identifies the sender's signing key. With that, we're ready to provide an overview of our analysis. We looked at 4 different applications and found different kinds of insider and outsider attacks. In MLS, we found insider replay and reordering attacks that result from the lack of context binding. In session, we found insider and outsider replays as well as outsider forgeries that also resulted from the lack of context binding. We rediscovered the outsider forgery attack against Signal that was previously found by Balbas, Collins, and Gowland in 2023 that resulted due to the use of a symmetric encryption scheme that does not provide integrity of ciphertexts. Finally, we did find attacks against Matrix in our model, but these attacks were mitigated by how the chat encryption algorithm is used in the broader protocol. For each of the apps, we paired them with security proofs that proved them secure up to the attacks we identified. The attacks are more interesting than the proofs, so in this talk, I'll focus on the attacks. In particular, I'll focus on MLS in session. MLS is the IETF standard for group messaging specified in RFC 9420 with several implementations. MLS has a big feature for deriving encryption keys to ensure that each message sent in a group is encrypted using a fresh key. First, members' public keys are used to derive a secret key. Then this key is used to derive a whole bunch of other keys. And then that key is used to derive yet another bunch of keys, eventually deriving the encryption keys. The encryption keys are uniquely defined by which group you are in, where you are here, which is called the epoch, where you are in the secret tree, which is called the leaf index, and where you are in this chain, which is called the generation. What you need to take away from this complicated picture is that every member of the group maintains this big structure, and encryption keys are uniquely identified by this for tuple that we call the group key identifier. Now let us see how encryption keys are used to encrypt chat messages. MLS composes a signature scheme and a nonce-based encryption scheme in a sign then encrypt fashion. So first, it signs the message body along with some other data using the sender's signing key to produce a signature. Then it encrypts the message body and the signature with an AED scheme using the keys from the previous slide to produce a ciphertext C. Then the sender broadcasts the ciphertext C to the group. Ideally, we would want that the signature authenticates the key identifier of the encryption key so that a group insider cannot re-encrypt a previously sent message signature pair using a different key. If we compare the group key identifier with what the signature authenticates, we see that it authenticates the group, the epoch, and the leaf index, but does not authenticate the generation. So the group key identifier is not entirely authenticated by the signature. The encryption nonce is also not bound to the signature, but this leads to an attack with debatable value, so I do not discuss this in this talk. The lack of authentication of the generation results in an attack because it allows a malicious insider to move between generations and forge a new ciphertext for a previously produced signature and message. In practice, this can allow a group insider to replay or reorder messages sent by other users. I'll lay out the replay attack in detail here. Picture a group chat where a member asks this seemingly benign question. Our honest user responds by saying, "I promise to give the original sender $1. To send this message, they first sign it using their signing key, then encrypt the message on the signature and broadcast the resulting ciphertext to the group. Let G0 be the key identifier for this key. When group members decrypt this ciphertext, they'll see the message on their clients. Recall that the signature does not authenticate the generation. This allows a malicious insider to replay messages using a decrypt then re-encrypt technique. First, they decrypt the original ciphertext using the corresponding key. Then they re-encrypt the signature and the message obtained using a different symmetric key, which has the same identifier as the original key, except the generation is a future generation. The malicious attacker saves this forged ciphertext C', and later on uses the ciphertext to impersonate the original sender by broadcasting C' to the group. To other group members, it appears as if the original sender resent their message. MLS specifically tries to prevent an insider who knows encryption keys from forging messages as having come from someone else. Not authenticating the generation allows a malicious insider to replay messages sent by honest members, directly contradicting this goal. The insider replay attack resulted from the lack of binding between the signature and the generation, so the fix is to bind them. MLS already signs the associated data, so one way to achieve this binding is to include the generation in the associated data, though this leaks the generation because the associated data is sent in the clear. We disclosed our finding to the working group by posting to the mailing list. The turnaround time was really quick with an acknowledgement from the working group. We were invited to speak at the ITF 122 meeting, after which the architecture document was updated to disclaim that it does not prevent against insider replays and suggests application layer fixes. The working group informed us that MLS will likely fix it at the protocol level by including the generation in the signature inputs in future versions. I'll take a moment here to discuss why past analysis did not identify this attack. This may be in part because most of the work on secure group messaging has focused on the key agreement primitive. We are aware of 2 papers that modeled chat encryption while analyzing MLS as a whole. Neither of these identified the replay attack. Klimovic did not provide a formal analysis of chat encryption or address insider security notions, so it didn't identify the replay attack. ACDT models MLS chat encryption as encrypt then sign, whereas the protocol specification uses a sign then encrypt construction. Furthermore, while the current MLS specification does not sign message generations, the pseudocode of ACDT does. This raises an important question. If ACDT had modeled the exact MLS specification, would their formalism have identified the insider replay attack? We argue that it would not. The definitions of ACDT do not account for insider security, and their security game includes a corruption oracle that reveals the entire state of a group member, including their signing key in all symmetric keys for the current epoch. Moreover, their security definition requires the attacker to be passive after a compromise until the group's secret is updated. In contrast, our insider replay attack exploits the scenario where the attacker actively injects messages in the group after learning the symmetric key, but not the sender's signing key. Interestingly, MLS did sign the generation in draft versions 1 to 4, but dropped it in version 5, ostensibly while renaming and redefining the struct. We also found replay attacks against Session, a decentralized, privacy-focused messaging app with about 1 million users, which offers end-to-end encrypted group chats for groups of up to 100 members. We first found an insider replay attack, which, morally speaking, is similar to the MLS attack and results from the lack of authentication of the group key identifier. But this led us to think about replays in general, and we realized that Session didn't cryptographically protect against replays in general. In Session, every ciphertext sent in a group contains a sent timestamp. This timestamp is used to detect replays. However, this timestamp is unauthenticated. This allows anyone, even a group outsider, to modify the timestamp and replay ciphertexts to the group. Of course, an outsider may have trouble knowing what message is being replayed, and so a non-insider may find it difficult to extract value from this attack. We disclosed this and other attacks to Session, who acknowledged this attack and helped clarify our understanding of some others. It turned out that they had already designed a new version of the protocol, which they rolled out soon afterwards, which seems to prevent the most important of our attacks, though we have not formally analyzed it. That brings us to the takeaways, and here are some key takeaways from our work. First, sender authenticity is very important in group messaging, arguably even more than privacy. This means that insider security notions are important, because malicious members may join a group due to a variety of reasons. For example, they may join a group using a link, or a member in a protest group may get arrested, or as in a more recent case, a member may get accidentally added to a private group. Due to the sensitive contexts in which these apps get used, we should aim to provide some guarantees against malicious insiders. Second, even though combining encryption max and signatures seems straightforward, we saw that their interactions may result in subtle vulnerabilities. Finally, formal security definitions are useful in analyzing real-world security. They allow secure designs, which are simple because we know what our goals are. Moreover, in our case, with the definitions in place, the attacks were in some senses easy to find. The details of our analysis are in our paper, which is now on ePrint. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Akshaya, for the great talk. Do we have questions for her in the audience? So I was wondering, given that you looked at several real-world schemes here, does there emerge a general solution where you'd say, use this and then you're good? Or are the settings different enough that you need tailored solutions ultimately?
So the exact construction, there is a generic solution that we provide that we say is secure. And even between sign then encrypt and encrypt then sign, we're able to show that sign then encrypt is in some ways more favorable because encrypt then sign requires assuming unique signatures to prove optimal security. But the exact implementation would depend on how the chat encryption gets used in the broader protocol. So even though it may not be secure under the symmetric sign encryption model, we find that it is secure outside in the broader protocol.
Okay, thanks. I don't see other questions. Please feel free to reach out to her online and to all the other speakers, of course, as well. Thanks, Akshaya, again, and let's thank all the speakers and her in the session.